Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, my name is Bennett Smith. The other individual helping out with this is named Terry Tucker, and we're going to go through some stuff about Xcode 6 and Storyboards, and then do a little demo of how Storyboards work with Xcode 6. Let me see if I can get things started here. That's not what I want. There we go. Okay, so basically, uh, we all know that Xcode 6 was just released this week by Apple, along with all these new devices they've announced. Xcode 6 has been available to us as developers in beta form since mid-June when Apple held their developer conference. A lot of things have changed in how you deal with the user interface in an application now. Um, and over the summer, they obviously couldn't really tell anybody the specific reason why, but everyone inferred it was because of bigger phones. As of the announcements earlier this week, it's pretty obvious there's new resolutions for phones, but there is also this iWatch, or I guess Apple Watch now. And we haven't seen all the details of the watch development kit yet, but there were enough demonstrations of third-party apps running on the watch that we can reasonably sort of anticipate that next year we will also be building user interfaces for watches with Xcode and Interface Builder. So let's go through some of the things that are new. Obviously, I mean, you already know this, but there's a bunch of different screen sizes now. Um, Last night you could place an order for one of these huge phones if you wanted, um, and they are not just scaled up versions of the same phone. You can see on the screen here things like, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 rows of icons on the 5C and the 5S, but you get to the 6 or the 6 Plus, and there's an additional row. So clearly there's more space, and it's not just scaling up of the existing UI. You truly have more screen real estate available to you when you're building an app. And so we'll have to make some changes in how we build storyboards and how we build out the user interface to accommodate that, to make one application that can adapt to these different sizes. Um, they also obviously announced these watches, and it's clearly a very small screen, but I think it's a very high resolution screen. There isn't currently support directly in Xcode for anything that obviously looks like designing for a phone, at least not that I've seen yet. But like I said, we can anticipate that. There's another thing that they don't talk a lot about right now, but there's a big initiative for them to put this thing called CarPlay in, which is an alternate user interface within automobiles that your phone can interact with, and you can drive custom UI to that as well. And so that's yet another varying resolution that you can take advantage of in your apps now. Okay, so Apple has introduced a concept they call size classes as a way to help us manage the different characteristics of these devices. Um, Basically, a size class describes attributes of either the width or the height of your user interface. And if you think about a storyboard, in a storyboard, every view controller, they term it as a scene. So every one of those scenes is basically a view that is intended to be displayed somewhere in the user interface. And every one of those views now, as of Xcode 6, will have 2 size classes associated with it. It will have one for horizontal and one for vertical sizing. Each of those size classes will be of one of 2 types. It'll either be a regular size class, or it will be a compact size class. And the combinations of either regular width, compact height, or regular width, regular height, and so on, those determine how the operating system will lay out that view and how it will um, apply subviews to the view hierarchy and how it will decide which auto layout constraints to apply or which ones to remove or maybe to change some properties of. So there's sort of a complex matrix now of different characteristics for each view controller in your user interface, all of which are sort of turned on and off based on these size classes. Um, they're predefined as to what they are for each of the current device types. So here we're looking at a normal iPad or an iPad Air, and the size classes for height are regular and width are regular. Notice how even when the device is rotated, so you change the orientation of the device, they are still considered regular height and width size classes. In neither case here do they become compact. When you get to a phone, then the um, the size classes change. When you're in portrait mode, the height is still considered a regular size class, similar to what you see on an iPad, but the width is considered a compact width. Um, when you rotate the iPhone to landscape mode, then both the width and the height size classes change to compact mode. So this is something you'll just get used to as you're interacting with Xcode, with the interface builder, that you'll know that a particular combination means a particular type of a device. When you're going to work on designing your, um, oops, sorry. When you're going to work on designing for size classes, the model is basically to start by designing for a very abstract size. And what you'll see when we get into the demo with Xcode is that by default, when you open up a storyboard and you add a view controller to it, the view controller is square and it's a resolution or a point size on the width and the height that do not directly equate to any existing physical device. So I think the width and the height end up being something like 600, but I'm not sure about that. So you end up with this square view that you're trying to design for initially. And the idea is you would lay out as many of the controls that are a part of your view as you can in that square mode. And you would apply auto layout constraints to that in order to get a general set of rules about how you want that view to appear. Once once you have that set up, then you can use a new preview assistant editor that Xcode provides to see how those constraints are being utilized to actually lay out the views on a real device. So you'll either be looking at like a version of a 4 or a 4S or a 6 plus or whatever in this assistant editor. And as you make changes to the abstract view auto layout constraints or you add more views to the hierarchy, you will see a real-time rendering of what it will look like on some other real device type. And so when you're working in this particular mode, Xcode refers to this as being in a width any, height any, or shorthanded WNEHNEANY size class. So instead of being specifically regular or compact on width and height. Once you have things set up in that abstract set of size classes, then you can start using some features that Xcode provides to change the size class. So you can change the storyboard to be in width regular or sorry, width compact but height regular, which would be like an iPhone in portrait mode. And it'll adjust the size of everything in the storyboard, and then you will see in those previews whether or not your auto layout constraints were sufficient to produce the kind of layout you were looking for your user interface. And you'll kind of go through this process of tweaking the design for each of the different sets of size classes that you're targeting with your application. Um, and the kinds of things you can do when you target are you can either add or remove views from a view hierarchy, or you can add, remove, or edit the constraints that are part of your layout. So when you're looking at this stuff in Xcode, you're going to see something like this partial screen capture on the left side of the screen here. So here we're looking at in Interface Builder the control that is used to select your width and your height size class during design time. And basically it's this square in the middle here that represents any width or any height. Um, and so the first column, it represents compact, the last column represents regular, and the thing in the middle represents any. So that box means any, that means any, that means any, and that means any. So if you pick the thing right in the middle, you're basically at the intersection of any width and any height. If you come down here and you were to pick this guy, you would be picking compact, width, and any height. Um, I'm sorry, and regular height. And so you'll get used to using this to sort of adjust things in the storyboard. Um, so by selecting this guy in the middle, you're targeting basically all of these devices. You're saying the set of constraints that I'm going to be laying out and the views I'm going to have in my view hierarchy, they are the things I intend to have rendered for all of the different devices that are shown on the screen here. So if you switch it to something like that, compact width, any height, you're now picking basically all iPhones, right? You're excluding any of the iPads and you're saying, I want to create some layout constraints specific to the iPhone, but I want them to work for both orientations of the device. That may not be a very common one to do. It may be more common to target just one orientation or the other. And so here's how you would target a specific orientation. Okay, and so we'll look at how those work in a demo in a few minutes here, but there are a couple other items I want to go over that are also new with Interface Builder. We have this concept now of what they call live views, and it's not uncommon for you when you're building out the user interface of an application to create custom views. So basically, you'd create your own custom drawing code in a subclass of UI view, and up until Xcode 6, the way people would lay out their storyboard or their zip file when they're dealing with a custom view is they would drag a UI view from the object palette out onto their canvas and size it to where they want it on the screen, and it would just sit there and look like a little white square. There wouldn't be any way you could really tell what was actually going to show up in that part of your user interface until runtime, when it actually, um, you know, instantiated your subclass of UI view and put it in that location in the view hierarchy. Now we have this ability to construct custom subclasses of UI view and put the code for them in a framework, which is also something new with Xcode 6, or at least it's new for iOS. It's not new for OS X. So you can create this UI view subclass, you stick it in a framework, and then by using a couple of new attributes in your source code, you can indicate to Xcode that this particular class represents a user interface component. So there's a attribute called IB designable that is something that you would add just before the app interface in your header file if you're using Objective-C. and there's a similar notation for when you're using Swift. So what that'll do is that'll tell Xcode that this particular class is something that can be rendered at design time. Excuse me. The other attribute that is provided to you now is something called IB inspectable. And this is an attribute that we can apply to any property that's part of our subclass of UI view. And IB inspectable allows us then to interact with those properties of our class at design time inside the attribute inspector of Xcode. So we'll see that as well. So we'll be able to do things like if we've got a custom view that has a image that's supposed to be displayed in it, we can expose information to Interface Builder that allows the person designing an application to select the specific image content they want just by interacting with the attribute inspector. So it's a very nice set of new features for doing UI design. Next thing is Xcode 6 provides us with a resizable simulator. Now what that means is we can set the point size for width and height in the simulator. They provide a number of canned versions of the simulator, like the iPhone 6 or iPhone 5S or whatever, that are at the appropriate resolutions. But you can also go in there and you can now just set any arbitrary width and height you want. And based on what you set the width and height for, you can also set what you want the size class to be in the width and the height directions. So it means the simulator becomes a lot more capable of being used to test a number of different devices, including things that that we don't have available yet as physical devices. The last thing is view debugging. So there's two new things that I'm going to show you. One of them only listed here. So there's I keep talking about a view hierarchy that, as your app is running, there's all these views and some of them are child views of other views and so on. And when we're using auto layout, it's not uncommon to make a mistake and have your auto layout constraints locate a view somewhere where it's not visible on the screen. It may end up being behind another view, or it may end up being too small because the width and the height weren't calculated right, or the position of it may be such that it's off the screen. All of those situations are hard to debug because you look at your application running and you scratch your head and you're going, where are my views? I have code here that's supposed to put them on the screen, but they're not showing up. This new feature to let you capture the view hierarchy in the debugger makes troubleshooting those kinds of things quite a bit easier, because now we can, while the app is running, we can stop it, capture the view hierarchy, and then Xcode provides a visualization tool to let us look at all of the layers that represent the different views. Some of you may be familiar with third-party tools that made this sort of thing possible in earlier versions of Xcode. There's a popular commercial tool called Reveal. There's also some open source tools that do this kind of a thing. In general, those tools still seem to have more features than the stuff that's built into Xcode, but it is now the case that Xcode has sort of a basic functional version of that built right in. And the last thing that I forgot to put on the slide here, but another debugging thing that they now make available, is they make it possible for us to create what are called custom quick look views. So if we have any model object that has some interesting information in it, like maybe it stores an image plus some string properties like a first name and a last name, or a URL to something or whatever. In the past, if you wanted to look at the contents of that in the debugger, the only way you could really do it was get an instance of that variable, get a reference to it basically in the debugger, and then expand it out and look at each of the properties individually. And you would basically be just looking at strings or addresses or maybe integers or floats in memory. If there was any more complex visual representation that might be useful, there was no easy way for you to do that in the debugger. Now it's possible to write quick look support into any object that's part of your application. And the debugger will automatically sense that that has been implemented And then when you're stopped in the debugger and you're looking through the variables that are part of your application, you can get these custom little quick look views that show your own data in a way that you're comfortable looking at it. And we'll see an example of one of those also. Okay, so let's switch over to Xcode now. All right. So the project that I have here is, sorry, I'm just moving a couple things around on my screen here. The project I have here is an example that maintains an array of email addresses, and then based on that array of email addresses, it goes out to this website called Gravatar and tries to get the image for that email address's avatar, and then displays it on the screen. And it's going to display it in a couple different ways. It's going to display it in a master detail view, where the master part of it is just a table view, that one row per email address, and the detail view is sort of a fancier looking user interface. The project is set up with two different targets. So you can see there's a Gravatar's target here, and there's a Gravatar kit target. This Gravatar kit is a framework that was constructed. So if I click here to add a new target, you can see we now have this Cocoa Touch framework type as a new type in Xcode. And so that's how that was added to the project. And within that Gravatar kit, I put a couple of things. I made myself a custom view. So I have this thing called Gravatar view, which is a subclass of UI view, and it has two properties. It has an image, and it has a saturation level that's going to be applied to the image. But all the other information about sort of how it's rendered is all down here um, in this class called Gravatar view. And we'll see how that looks in a few minutes. Then inside the framework, I also put a model object. So a model object that represents an individual gravatar. This is just something that has an email address, a image for the gravatar at full resolution, and an image for the gravatar in a thumbnail resolution. And the initializer for the model object takes an email address and then takes a completion handler block as well. And at initialization time, it goes out and talks to the internet and gets the images and whatnot. When it's all done, it calls that completion handler. And then there's some other things here, debug-related things that we'll go over in a few minutes. But that's basically what's inside of our model. We've got a custom view, and we've got this one object that represents the model data. Now, if we come up here, Gravatars, this is the application that we're actually going to be playing with. It's structured the same way apps were structured before iOS 6. We have an app delegate, we have a master view controller, a detail view controller. As I said, the master view controller, it's a table view controller. So we also have a custom table view cell here that is going to display the information about one gravatar. And then we have a storyboard. Now, if you're familiar with building iOS apps previous to Xcode 6, you know that usually when you build out an application, you're going to get two storyboards. You're going to get one storyboard for the iPhone, and you're going to get a separate storyboard for the iPad. That is not the case any longer. When you build out an application from the templates now, you will only get a single storyboard. And so our storyboard here, let me actually make a little more room here. So our storyboard basically, oops, come on. Okay, I think you can see most of it there probably. So our storyboard here has a number of view controllers in it, all of which are square. These are the view controllers that are in the abstract size classes applicable to all devices. And all of these view controllers were constructed for us automatically by the template when I created the master detail template. I've added some stuff. You can see some stuff up here in the master. There's a custom table view cell here. And then you can see in the detail view, there's some stuff that was added as well. So basically, this was just dragging some more things into the hierarchy. So as the app sits right now, if I run it, it should work. So we're going to try it on an iPhone 5S. So actually, let me zoom in on this guy a little bit first here and just show you what's on this. So here's my detail view. I have a background image here. I have the gravatar, which is my custom subview. I have another UI image view. Oh, let me bring that up. So I have another image view here, which represents the little iOS Weekend logo. And then I have a label that contains an email address. And that label is being displayed as attributed text, and it happens to be white, which is why you don't really see it unless I highlight it here. But it has a font associated with it. It's been centered. It's got some formatting that's been done to it. And so that's sitting right there. And so what I don't have, if you look over here, is I don't have any auto layout constraints on anything right now. Okay. So if we go run this on an iPhone 5S, this is what we get. Okay, so first of all, here's the list. I just built a list, just had my name and Terry's name in it. And so it went out to Gravatar, it got the two images, and that's what the default thumbnail images look like that came back from Gravatar. If I select one of these now, it pushes to the detail view because we're on the iPhone right now. And you can see that things aren't really laid out the way we want them to be, right? So this guy had a regular height and a compact width, and this was our original storyboard was set up for width any, height any. And obviously things are kind of off screen. So actually if you kind of lay this thing on top of that, you can kind of even see that, well, where that image happens to be sitting in the scene in the storyboard editor is roughly where it actually ended up being displayed on the iPhone. Not really what we wanted, right? We'd probably like this to be centered and adjusted basically for the device. So I'm going to stop the simulator. Let's try a different one. Let's try an iPad simulator. And you can see that things actually get a little bit worse here. So it's showing the full background image. It's clearly not, taking advantage of the full screen size here. The logo is roughly in the right place. I think if we do that, it's going to be, kind of where it's supposed to be. This guy's completely missing in action. We don't have any idea where it went, and we don't know where the URI, the email address went either. That stuff's just gone. It's somewhere, but it's not easily seen. And if I rotate it, when I rotate it, you can see that it's showing the master and the detail view. And if I select again, then they show up. I think they're in the right spot. Um, rotate back again. So basically, we've got things that are not really ideal at the moment. What we want to do is we want to go in and we want to start modifying this stuff with some auto layout constraints and try and get it to show up on the different devices in the correct way. Um, so let's start with this big white square right here. So the first thing we might like to do is we might like to actually have a real preview of what the image is. Now, we're in design mode here, so whatever image displays here, it's not really going to be related to one of the objects that are in our running application. So there has to be some sort of a placeholder object that can be used there. And if we come over here to our Gravatar kit and we look at our view, so the first thing we need to do is we need to take this IB designable attribute, and we simply need to put it on a line the line right before at interface. If I do that, and then we come back over here to our storyboard, we now see an actual rendering of the view for our custom view. Now, this image comes from some default data that we had to put into our view controller, or not our view controller, sorry, in our custom view. So going back to our custom view in the .m file, there is a method that any custom view, any subclass of UI view can now implement called prepare for interface builder. If you implement this method, you can effectively initialize an instance of the, the view with properties that make it look representative of what the runtime environment would be. So in this case, in Prepare for Interface Builder, what I've done is I've gone out, I've gotten the framework bundle, and then I've used that to go out and load in an image. So if I look here in the image assets the um, for Gravatar Kit, I actually have an image sitting here, and that's the image that we're seeing over here. Now, all the other code that's causing this thing to be circular instead of square and to have, the right transparency around it, all of that code is the custom code that is in our UI view subclass, and it's all running as we'd expect. It's just that we provided it with an image programmatically in that prepare for interface builder call. So um, so that's a good start. We might like to, though, see it instead of with this representative image from the developer who built the custom view. We might like to pick a custom image. Maybe our designer gave us some sample images that are supposed to be part of our app or something like that. We might like to change this. So there's a way we can do that now as well. If we go back over here to our Gravatar view header file, each of these two properties, so I've got a property here for the image and a property for the saturation, each of them can be exposed to Interface Builder. If we take this IB inspectable and we add it in very much the same way that in the past we would add something like IB outlet. So we add IB inspectable right here. And what that's going to do is that's going to mean that when we're looking at our custom view in our storyboard, we can change these values now. So if I select our image and I come over here and I look at, here we go, Gravatar view has an image and has a saturation. So if I change the saturation to something like 0.5, you can see how this guy got lighter. If I change it even more, oops, I didn't want to do that. Let's say 0.8. And then I can also change now, in this pull down here, I can change the image. So I could put the logo there if I wanted to. I could put the sample, or I could put another copy of the vineyard, which is clearly not rendering exactly the way I want it. We'll go back to that one. Excuse me. So that makes dealing with custom views really very nice that we have these abilities now. Let's take a look at our layout in the assistant editor and see if we can start fixing some of these auto layout issues. So I'm going to change from the standard editor to the assistant editor. And of course, I don't have a whole lot of screen space here. Okay, so here's our width any, height any version of this. Here's an iPhone 4 that for some reason has not rendered properly. There we go. Okay, I had to select that. And so this looks pretty much like what we saw when I ran it in the simulator. Now, at the moment, it's not showing custom subviews, and I haven't figured out how to get that to work in the released version or the GM version of Xcode 6. In the beta version that I had been using when I developed this stuff originally, that same preview version of the view was also showing up right here. And so I don't know if it's some setting that they've added to turn it on and off, or what. Uh, but in the current released version, that's not showing up. Maybe it's just a bug. I'm not sure. Okay, so I'm looking at it on the iPhone 4 right now. Let's try and get the auto layout constraints so that this guy is centered and this is centered, and we get back our logo here. Um, first thing is, for our images, there is a new auto layout constraint that is offered in iOS 8, that if we drag sideways, I'm holding down the control key. If I drag across any view, I get a new choice here, which is aspect ratio. And so since right now, before I select that, so if I look at my view controller and I come over here and I look at the size, you can see that it's square right now. It's 198 points wide and 198 points high. So I want it to remain square all the time. So I'm just going to drag across and I'm going to put the aspect ratio constraint in there. And so that's going to cause me to have a 1-to-1 aspect ratio. You can see it right here, 1-to-1 ratio for this view. Now, the other thing I want is I want this view to always be centered. And so I'm going to add a couple of constraints to center it. Oops. So I'm going to come in here and say center horizontally, center vertically, add those two constraints. Now I need a constraint to set what I'd like the width to be for this thing. I only have to set either the width or the height. I don't have to set them both because of that aspect ratio thing. So I'm going to set the width here by dragging straight across. I'm going to say I want the width to be what it was. And now you can see that in our preview over here, this is now centered the way it should be. Okay, so let's move on and work on the label here. So the label should be centered. So we can center it horizontally. And we need to decide what we want to do with it vertically. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and I'm going to set it vertically to be the standard distance from the bottom edge of the avatar. So first I'm just going to drag up here and say vertical spacing, but then I'm going to edit the vertical spacing. I'm going to select it and come over here. Right now it shows the vertical spacing is a constant value of 43 because that just happens to be where they were laid out at the moment. But I would like to change that instead to be the standard value. Okay, so that's going to move it up, and you can see that it's sort of right up underneath the image now. That may not be, from a design aesthetic point of view, the best place to put it, but for now that's a reasonable thing to do that will work in all the different rotations we've got for the layout. Okay, so it's been centered and it's nestled up next to the avatar, which should be fine. Now let's take care of the logo at the bottom. Again, if we look over here, the logo is square, so I'm going to set the aspect ratio on it. And then again, I'm going to want it to be centered. Oh, nice, look at that. At the moment, obviously the auto layout constraints are not sufficient. Okay, so I'm going to center it. And then I'm going to set it to be the standard distance from the bottom edge of the view. Okay, so we're going to say bottom space to bottom layout. And then the last thing we need to do is set the width of it. And now it's right where it should be. Okay, so we've added some layout constraints. Remember, we're working entirely in the width any, height any size classes right now. And I'm going to go run it on, well, I didn't really want to run it on the iPad Air, but I guess we'll see what happens. There's one thing that I've obviously forgot to set. So the background, I still haven't set it to contain the whole thing. Our logo seems to be in the right place now. So let's see if we can improve this a bit. Okay, so we need to to set up the background. And for the background, I really want it to basically be pinned to all four edges of the parent. And so I'm going to do that this way. I'm going to turn off this constrain to margins, and then I'm going to select all four of those. And I'm going to have it updated if it needs to. And there we go. Okay, so now our background should be in the right place. And see what all we've got here. Okay, so let's switch this to the, we were looking at it here in the preview on, actually, let's do one other thing first. So close that to make a little more room. We can actually preview this on multiple different devices at the same time. So there's a plus item down here in the assistant editor. I can click on that and I can say, you know what, I'd also like to look at it on a 5.5-inch iPhone. And it will show both of them side by side now. And it looks like the layout should work on both of those based on what we're seeing here. I can take that guy away, or actually let's rotate it. So that shows what it will look like when it's rotated. That doesn't look quite right. It looks like things are going to overwrite each other here. We're going to need to do something to take care of that. Let's rotate that one back just to create some space, and let's take the iPhone 4 and rotate it. I think the problem will be even worse. So obviously there's some things for the compact height that we need to lay out differently than the width any, height any. I think an obvious simple thing to do would be to change the width of the image when we're in the rotated orientation. But we'll get to that in a minute. We'll give that a try. Okay, so let's switch ourselves over just to make sure that this is really working. 5S, run it in the simulator. And that looks pretty good. We should see the problem when we rotate it, that things are, clearly not laid out well. And all right. Okay, so let's actually set a breakpoint and let's look at this quick look thing real quick here. Okay, so I'm going to open up the Project Explorer here. We're going to set up our Gravatar cell, and I'm going to put a breakpoint right here. Now this is a custom table view cell that's just rendering each of those two rows that we select from to look at the detail view. The reason why I'm going to set a breakpoint here is so we can take a look at this Gravatar object that's being passed in, and I can show you how this quick look thing works. Down over here under the Gravatar kit, where we created the model object for a Gravatar, in the implementation file over here, so we've got our init method, and we've got that background method that does the fetch, and we've got something that renders the thumbnail. Then I added a class category for debugger support called Gravatar parentheses debugger support. So these methods are part of the Gravatar class, but they're just being stored out in a separate file. And there is a method that is being added here called debug quick look object, and it returns an opaque type ID that the debugger will render in its user interface at debug time. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass back an attributed string. And the code here just constructs an attributed string that contains the email address plus the Gravatar image, and actually shows you the image. So it actually puts an image attachment into the attributed string and formats it up nicely. And so all of, see, everything from here down, all of this is just a whole bunch of sort of fiddly code that deals with attributed strings in order to format up how I might like to look at these things in the debugger. And this one method right here, debug quick look object, is the thing that's actually interacting with the debugger. So let's go ahead and run it again here, and we'll stop at our breakpoint. And here we are, we're at our breakpoint. You can see the gravatar here. We can do the normal things where we sort of look at the information that's in it. And I'm actually going to let it run a few more times because this is actually before the data is really live. You can see those guys are nil right now. It means the background. There we go. So now we're looking at a gravatar that's actually been initialized from the server. We have the two images sitting here, plus the email address. So this is an interesting way to look at stuff. Now you can use sort of the default quick look that's built in. There's this little eye icon down at the bottom here. I can click on that and it will show me the quick look for the string. Or if I click on an image, it will show me the quick look for an image, which is way bigger than it should be probably, or the thumbnail. Okay, so you can see that kind of stuff. Those are built-in quick look capabilities that are part of Xcode. But we have now added a custom quick look. So I can actually just click on a gravatar and click on the icon, the eye icon there. And this information here is a custom quick look that was rendered by us in our own code. Now you can do anything you want in there. You can create a custom subclass of UI view that actually, draws some stuff. Or in this case, like you're seeing, just do an attributed string. There's a number of things you could imagine to do there that are pretty convenient, and it's very easy to add that kind of thing to the debugger now. Okay, so we'll let it keep going. And let's go over here, and then the other one that is capable of being looked at now is the view hierarchy. And so let me come back in here, and under where was it? It's under one of these methods. There it is right there, view debugging. So I can say capture view hierarchy. And so it's going to go talk to the application running in the simulator. And what it's done here is it's captured. So if I switch over to the simulator is still running. And this window here is a rendering of that same information. Let's see, can I stay in front? Okay. So these are all of the views, and I can use the mouse to rotate this if I want. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at a stack of all of the views that are part of the view hierarchy of this application. And I can select one of these views if I want. And since I'm in assistant editor right now, it's actually showing me the header file for that view. So if I select this guy here, it's a UI image, UI label, UI image view. So you can see the general idea of how this works. You can show auto layout constraints. So you can see some auto layout constraints here and select those and come over here. And you can see that there's a layout constraint. The first item is a UI image view. It's an equality constraint, has a multiplier, a constant, and a priority. So we can really actually, let's see if I can go back to this beginning. Come on, one of these guys. There we go. So if there's too much content, you can turn things off and just look at wireframes of all the views. Okay, so you can see there's an awful lot of views that are part of this app, even though we only know about sort of 3 or 4 of them. There's a lot of layers here. And this control here will let us peel away some of those layers. So you can see as I'm moving that thing along, it's actually removing some of the things from the view. Let me turn back on the content. Come on. Interesting. There we go. Okay. So I can do this. I can start peeling away some of that content. As I do that, you can see some of the things disappearing. So this is, I mean, this is their view debugging capability. I think it's pretty good. Certainly useful enough to solve problems with how the app is working. Okay, I think, so let me go back into the storyboard for just one more moment to show you how we would change constraints per, get this guy off of the front of the screen. And turn off the assistant editor for a minute. Okay, so we're looking at our width any, height any. The W any, height anything at the bottom here is clickable. When I click on that, it brings up that user interface that you saw in the slides. And the default is having this guy in the middle selected. If I wanted to do some layout that was specific to regular width and a compact height, or maybe compact width, compact height. So you can see down at the bottom there, it says final values for 3.5 inch, 4 inch, and 4.7 inch iPhones in landscape mode. And we know that that's a mode that our application currently is having trouble rendering in. So if we click on that, you can see now that at the bottom it says W compact, H compact, and notice there's the whole thing is a blue bar. This is sort of a visual cue to the developer that, hey, we're not editing the abstract set of constraints in view hierarchy anymore. We're now editing things that are specific to compact width, compact height. And so let me turn back on the assistant editor and switch the assistant editor to the preview and get some of this other stuff out of the way here. I'm going to take some of these other things out. So you just click on one of these, the previews, and just hit delete and it'll go away. So I'm going to add a new one in here just for a 4-inch iPhone. And then since we're interested in the compact width, compact height, I'm going to turn it that way, come back over here and select this. And there's our rendering of what it looks like. Clearly not what we want. And let's see if we can figure out why this is the case. Let's start with, put that guy in the back so things show up correctly. All right, so what I think we want to do is we want to actually change one of these values. We want to change, so first thing I want to do is just want to show you a couple of the controls in the UI. So when I'm selecting something over here in the view hierarchy, and I'm over here in the attributes inspector, there is a new item down here called installed that has a check next to it. Installed is an indication of whether or not this particular view that I have selected, right now it's the background, whether or not it's installed into the view hierarchy for the particular set of size constraints that we've selected right now. And so right now, and there's a plus sign next to it. So if I click and I add another value for compact width, compact height, right below it here, now both of those things can be selected. And I could actually say, I don't want the background there on compact width, compact height. And so you can see that it's now been removed. If I come down here though, and I go back to width any, height any, it comes back, okay? So it never actually left the view, it never actually left sort of the design hierarchy over here, right? Here's the background, it's still sitting there. In fact, but because that guy's not checked, it won't actually be inserted into the view hierarchy at runtime, okay? So if I turn that back on, then it's inserted into the view hierarchy and we get what we want there. So actually, just because I noticed it, let's go back over here and make sure, okay, the background is in the right place there. Go back here. Okay, so obviously something's wrong with our with the size of this guy. We really want to change that size. So I'm going to take this constraint down here, and I'm going to edit its value for a size class customization, and I want to, let's see. That takes it away. Let me just edit it here to be something like maybe 96. See what that does. That looks a little bit better. And now let's go back to our width any, height any. And unfortunately, because of the way I just did that, it also changed it there. I'd have to actually insert a second constraint. Let me duplicate the constraint here. I can't do it that way. So you can see basically what happened was when I edited the width constraint here, it actually changed it for both of them. That's not really what I wanted to do. I really wanted to only edit it for the one size class, and I'm not sure what I did wrong, but it didn't stick. But we'll leave it that way for the moment. Okay, so that looks better here. There's still a problem between this guy and the logo. I think probably the right solution there, again, is just change the width of the logo to be something smaller, like 32, and that'll pull it out of the way as well. But really, we want that change only to occur at in the other size class. And the way you would normally do that is you would basically remove the constraint that is 32 and add a second width constraint that's only installed when you're in the other size class. But it's probably more steps than I want to show you right at the moment. Okay, so with that change, at least if we run it and we rotate it, it should now look correct. Okay, so now the rendering is the way you would expect it to be. I think that is most of the items that I wanted to show you today. I'd love to answer any questions if you have any questions about this. I'm going to take this recording that I've made of this and put it out on the Meetup site, so there'll be a link to it if you want to look at it again later. And like I say, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat area. Ask your questions, and Terry and I will be happy to try and answer them. If you have questions for us and you don't think about them till later, you can always contact me at benedict@focalshift.com, and I'll try and answer your questions later. So again, thank you very much for spending an hour with us, and hope you found it useful.